Hello, today we're looking at a brand new NES game, Flea 2, which has also come out on the Sega Dreamcast. Now, this is made by Lowtek games. I'm a big fan of Alistair and his games, having really enjoyed this game's predecessor Flea and his other NES Dreamcast game, Tapeworm. I believe the original Flea and Tapeworm are also available on several modern platforms as well as Evercade, so if you don't have an NES or Dreamcast you can still check them out. Before we dip into the game, let's have a look at the packaging here. This game was kickstarted and I believe the Kickstarter version was a unique white cartridge. Alistair has kindly sent over the standard edition for the NES, a Dreamcast copy and a soundtrack CD. Very kind indeed. The NES version here is numbered 143 of 160 and the Dreamcast version is number 127 of 200. So if you want a copy of this game, go get on it as copies are limited. You can buy yourself a copy by going to Lowtek's website, link below. The Dreamcast version has simple but authentic packaging in the jewel case style reminiscent of the North American Dreamcast packaging. The insert folds out and has a cut down version of the NES's manual. The NES version looks glorious and stays very true to classic NES packaging. Inside the box we have a styrofoam insert under the cart, a very nice looking grey cart inside a black NES style sleeve, and of course the manual. The manual, as I said, is much more in depth for the NES version. It features story cartoons, character bios and of course details on how to play the game. When I originally played Flea, I played it on the Dreamcast, which was fun, but I always felt its true home was on the NES. It looks and feels like an NES game, so I was very excited to get this sequel for Nintendo's console. Now let's have a look at the game. Now you'll immediately see what I mean when I said this game is right at home on the NES. That's mainly because this was created using NES Maker. The graphics are distinctly NES style. Not only that, but the game's chiptune music is also reminiscent of classic NES games and is for the most part pleasant, albeit subtle background music, with the odd track being more urgent in nature, for example on the boss levels. The controls are very simple in this game, whether you're playing on the NES or the Dreamcast. The player character, this Flea called Henry, constantly jumps, so whether you touch the controller or not, Henry will consistently jump, as you're seeing here. There are two buttons. One performs a boost, which is basically a sideways dash move. Press this combined with the direction and Flea will do a little mid-air boost sideways. This is used for reaching areas that would be otherwise out of reach for a normal jump, or to quickly avoid obstacles or enemies. This dash button has a second use, which is to interact with the various characters you'll meet along the way. The other button also has two uses. Mash it to perform very small jumps, meaning you have to mash this to stop Flea from doing his normal height jumps. This is used when traps like spikes would otherwise kill him. This button can also be held to perform a moon jump, which must be unlocked. Some basic info is displayed at the top of the screen there, the level you're on, and there's a boss after every 10 levels, your number of lives indicated by the hearts, and the number of blood vials you've collected. Blood can periodically be exchanged for lives, so it's best to try and collect as much as you can. Each level is contained within a single screen. The aim of each is to simply make it to the exit, gathering as much blood as you can en route. Levels contain various obstacles like spikes, hazardous pools of liquid, disappearing blocks and various other deadly features. And of course there are enemies which will always follow a set path, so you have to avoid them too. That can mean some very precisely timed jumps and dodges, as often you don't get much of a window of opportunity. Enemies are all variations of bugs or larvae like mosquitoes, bedbugs, maggots and so on. There are some other non-lethal features in the levels too, like these arrows which thrust you in the direction they're facing. The manual also hints at the wormholes making a reappearance which transport you to another wormhole on screen. I haven't seen one in all the levels I've played. Some later levels take place in liquid, so the jump button acts as a swim button. This adds a bit of variety if you can get that far, and that's a big if. Luckily the manual hints at a secret level warp that you can access from the game's main menu. This gives you instant access to the game's 80 levels plus all 8 bosses. So if you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the level warps. But seriously, this is a godsend if, like me, you have absolutely no hope of getting to the end of this game, but want to experience more of what the game offers. And it's not like the levels necessarily get harder the further along you go. Some of the later levels I found far easier than really early levels, so don't discount them if you're finding some of the earlier levels impenetrable. The bosses usually see you running across an auto-scrolling screen doing very precise jumps, running away from pursuing enemies, with the odd exception, for example navigating your way through a level featuring the titular tapeworm from Lowtek's puzzle game. The premise of this game is simple, but make no mistake, this is devilishly hard. Like, the original Flea was hard, but this is a step up from that. It's an absolute dog on some levels. I find this kind of game quite trying sometimes as my patience isn't the best, and this had me having to take breaks through sheer frustration. The kind of game that makes your hands sweat, know what I mean? The die and retry kind of vibe, or whatever you want to call it, is always walking a really fine line between frustration and reward, and this is right at that line, if not slightly over it for me, but there are loads of people out there that will see this as the perfect amount of challenge because they're not only more patient than me, but far more skillful. But I have found that a bit of calm and patience goes a long way here, as none of the levels are impossible given enough time to work them out and the poise to get through them. All in all, a very challenging but brilliantly done platformer for the NES, which is just as enjoyable on the Dreamcast. Definitely recommend checking it out, and link in the description to Lowtek's site. Right, I'm off to fill that controller shaped dent in my wall. Thanks for watching.